In the medieval landscapes of Norway, survival was a daily negotiation with the sea. Towering cliffs and endless fjords stood like sentinels against the icy winds, carving a land where farming was uncertain and winters unforgiving. Yet, amid this severity, the people of Norway found salvation in something deceptively simple: dried fish. It was a food that transcended sustenance, becoming a cultural cornerstone, an economic lifeline, and in many ways, the silent heartbeat of a nation. The rugged coastlines were more than scenic beauty, they were highways of survival. The North Sea and Norwegian Sea teemed with cod, particularly during winter migrations, when vast schools swam close to shore. For farmers battling thin soils and brief summers, this abundance from the ocean became a blessing that the land could never provide. Here, geography worked in paradox. What made agriculture difficult also created the perfect environment for preserving fish. Cold, dry winds sweeping through the fjords turned Norway into a natural workshop of preservation, where cod stiffened on racks became food that could endure for years. This was no small feat in a world where rot and spoilage were constant enemies. Fresh meat, dairy and vegetables rarely lasted through the season, leaving communities vulnerable to hunger. But with dried fish, Norwegians had something unique. A food supply that was both plentiful and durable. The very harshness of their climate gave rise to an advantage few others in Europe enjoyed. Stockfish, as it came to be called, was more than nourishment. It was survival incarnate. The process itself was deceptively simple yet ingenious. Fishermen split open the cod, cleaned and washed it, then hung it across great wooden frames called yell, erected on the blustery coasts. No salt was required. The Arctic winds kept pests away while the frigid air drew out moisture without letting the flesh decay. Over months the transformation occurred. By spring, the once living cod had hardened into something as stiff as timber, yet still nourishing. What emerged from this natural alchemy was a food so light it could be transported easily, so sturdy it could last for years, and so dependable that it became a shield against famine. For monasteries, villages and merchant ships alike, it was a marvel of preservation. It required no costly salt, an expensive rarity in northern Europe, and could be stored without fear of rot. In this way, a fish caught in the dead of winter might still feed a family years later. For everyday Norwegians, stockfish was the backbone of diet. Grain harvests were meagre, meat was often scarce, and dairy could spoil, but the tough slabs of dried cod were always waiting. Families softened it with water, hammered it back into pliability, and paired it with coarse bread, ale, or butter. It was not elegant dining, but it was dependable fuel for farmers ploughing frozen earth and fishermen braving storm-swept seas. Its presence in storerooms gave reassurance that hunger would not spiral into starvation. Religion amplified its role further. The Catholic Church's rules of abstinence, banning meat on Fridays and during Lent, created constant demand for fish. Dried cod, with its abundance and portability, became the perfect solution. Monasteries filled their cellars with piles of stiffened fish, ensuring monks could observe fasting rules without fear of scarcity. Pilgrims, nobles and peasants alike relied on it during religious observances. Eating dried fish was not simply nourishment. It became a ritual bound to faith, repeated week after week, year after year. What began as a local survival strategy soon rippled outward into commerce. By the high Middle Ages, stockfish had grown into one of Norway's most vital exports. Ships carried it across the North Sea to England, Germany, and beyond. Bergen rose as a thriving trade hub, bustling with German merchants from the Hanseatic League who swapped beer, cloth, and grain for racks of dried cod. This exchange did more than fill stomachs. It tied Norway into Europe's growing web of commerce. The Norwegian crown levied taxes, ports thrived, and fishermen found their livelihoods not only on the sea, but in the bustling markets where their catch turned into currency. For the people who braved those waters, fishing was both necessity and gamble. Cod migrations dictated the rhythm of life along the coasts. Men sailed into frigid waters, facing storms that could overturn boats and swallow entire crews. Families ashore depended on their safe return. Once landed, the fish underwent its ritual transformation, split, hung, dried, and what remained was more than food. It was survival insurance, trade commodity, and cultural marker rolled into one. Local laws even regulated the industry, protecting rights and ensuring the stability of this fragile but essential economy. Thus, geography, climate, faith, and labour wove together into a singular story. Dried fish was never just food in medieval Norway. It was survival written into the fabric of life itself. The strength of dried cod lay not only in its availability, but in its nourishment. Packed with protein and low in fat, it offered precisely what people enduring brutal winters and demanding labour required. Farmers carried it into fields during planting and harvest. Fishermen gnawed on it during voyages when fresh food was scarce. Its dense, enduring energy mirrored the endurance expected of Norwegians themselves. To chew through its toughness was almost symbolic, a reflection of the resilience demanded by frozen landscapes and stormy seas. In this way, nutrition and identity became intertwined. Stockfish fueled bodies, but also symbolized character, unyielding, reliable, and strong. It was food that seemed to embody the very people who consumed it. But its role extended beyond individual survival. Whole communities built cultural rhythms around it. Winter festivals often celebrated stockfish as the food that carried people through the darkest months. The act of pounding it before cooking became part of domestic ritual, binding families together across generations. Fishing seasons were marked by feasts not of meat, but of fish, a proud acknowledgement that this humble product defined them more than any lavish banquet could. Over time, stockfish became a cultural emblem as much as a staple, a quiet banner of Norwegian endurance and pride. Norway's dependence contrasted sharply with other European regions. In southern lands like Italy, Norwegian stockfish arrived as an exotic import, transformed into delicacies like bacala that still appear in kitchens today. In England and Germany, it was a valued commodity, especially during fasting days, yet never central to survival. There, fertile soils and warmer climates provided a broader menu of grains, fruits, and livestock. Norway, in contrast, had little choice. The rocky fields and short summers left the sea as the kingdom's true granary. This comparison reveals just how unique the Norwegian relationship to dried fish was. Where other societies treated it as useful or even luxurious, Norway wove it into the very structure of life. It was not an addition, it was the pillar itself. Trade only deepened this dual identity of sustenance and currency. Fishermen hauled in more than families required, and surpluses became wealth when exchanged in Bergen's harbours. The Hanseatic League's reliance on stockfish elevated its value, spreading Norway's influence into the economic bloodstream of medieval Europe. Silver might be scarce, grain might fail, but dried cod could always be counted upon, its value nearly as stable as coin. Behind every bundle shipped abroad stood the labour of coastal families. Their lives revolved around the cod's migration, preparing boats, risking storms, drying and storing the catch, then transporting it to ports. This rhythm became tradition, passed from one generation to the next. Laws codified practices, ensuring order in an industry that underpinned livelihoods. For many villages, the sea was not just a resource but an identity, binding community, commerce, and culture together in one relentless cycle. The dried cod also created bridges between sacred and worldly realms. In monasteries, it filled storerooms as a fasting staple. In markets, it filled purses with wealth. In kitchens, it filled stomachs. Its universality blurred divisions between poor and rich, sacred and secular, local and global. Stockfish was equally at home in a peasant's hut as in the diet of a bishop. This universality reinforced its role as cultural anchor, binding disparate elements of society with a single thread of sustenance. As centuries passed, dried fish moved from being only a survival tool to becoming a marker of heritage. Festivals honoured it, songs and tales referenced it, and communities remembered their dependence on it with pride rather than shame. It was not the luxury of kings that bound Norwegians together, but the simple cod stiffened by winter winds. In this humility lay identity. Even today, echoes of this legacy remain. In Italy, dishes built on stockfish still celebrate its enduring appeal. In Norway, the tradition of drying fish continues, reminding modern generations of the quiet resilience that carried their ancestors. The racks still rise along the coast, the wind still stiffens the flesh, and the story of survival remains alive in every piece. Ultimately, the tale of dried fish in medieval Norway is not just about diet. It is about survival, adaptation, and the transformation of hardship into strength. It fed households, empowered trade, supported faith, and shaped identity. It was the bridge that carried a people across centuries of cold and scarcity, forging a legacy more enduring than stone monuments. When we think of cultural heritage, we often imagine castles, sagas, or royal dynasties. Yet the true monument of Norway's medieval past might well be the silent fish racks along its shores, for in their shadows hangs the story of a people who turned geography's cruelty into opportunity, who took the simplest of foods and made it the foundation of identity. Through stockfish, medieval Norwegians transformed scarcity into resilience, hardship into heritage. And though centuries have passed, the stiffened cod still whispers across time, reminding us that survival is not merely about enduring. It is about making endurance itself a legacy.